Know Christ, a television ministry of the Lutheran Church of Peace in Platteville, Wisconsin. Here's your host, Reverend Jeff Pedersen.
Well, today our study is on, the fall of Jerusalem and Judah. We can just see it coming, as we're reading through, the history of God's people and how they were united under King David, and then after his son, King Solomon, at the end of his reign, there became problems, and that King Solomon, he started to listen to a lot of his wives that were foreign wives, and so you think, why did he, this man who was of such great wisdom, in fact, you can make the argument that he was probably the wisest person to ever live. After all, he wrote the Proverbs. When you read Proverbs, if you want wisdom for life, you read Proverbs, and I'll tell you what, it's just every one of those Proverbs, it's simple, but yet it's profound. And that every one of these Proverbs you can meditate on throughout your lifetime, and I'll tell you what, if you can somehow apply this to your life, you will be wise. And so you look at this man who has got great wisdom. You'd think he'd be just this solid foundation that can never be moved. But we must always remember that God is the foundation that can never be moved. But we need to be, pillars on that foundation, or what Peter would refer to as being the living stones. Jesus Christ is arisen. He's living, and it's upon Jesus that the church is built, and that we are the living stones, that we are all placed upon this foundation as being God's living temple, that we are the church. And that's why we always have to stay on that foundation. But when we start building our lives on other principles, as Jesus says, then it's like we are now building our life on a foundation of sand. And I don't know about you, but have you ever been on a beach before and built a sand castle? You know how beautiful some of these sand castles are? But as the wind and the tide comes in, it just washes the sand castle away. And that's what happens to our lives. We can build what we would call a wonderful worldly life. We have to always remember, though, that the tide comes in, that tide of death. And as much as we think we are so strong upon this foundation of sand, we don't need God in our lives. Matter of fact, we're so affluent now and so educated. I don't know about you, but I got enough diplomas to be able to wallpaper my house with. And so sometimes, I kind of think, I must be halfway smart. I don't need anybody telling me what to do. After all these institutions have given me the certificate basically saying, Jeff, you are smart. And so I look at that. Oh, yeah, I'm smart. I don't need anybody telling me what to do. I don't need God to tell me what to do. And when we live in a society where we are so affluent, if I want water, I can turn on a faucet, and I've got a whole ocean's worth of water at my disposal. If I want heat, I just turn up my thermometer or my thermostat a little bit, and I can be nice and toasty. If I want food, I can open my refrigerator, and I'll tell you what, I've got a feast that's just waiting for me there. If I need light, I just turn on a switch, and there it is, all coming at me at 180,000 miles per second. If I need to get somewhere, I get in my car. That's the way it is now, is that God has blessed us so richly in this land that we've become affluent to the point where, I can just kind of walk around a little bit with a strut and say, all this that you can see, this is all my doing. I take the credit. I'm sure that the Joneses are kind of looking at me. See, that's where we go wrong. And that was Solomon's problem. You know, what did King Solomon ask for? He asked for wisdom, and God gave him wisdom, saying, you know, Solomon, I'm giving, you know, you've asked for the right thing. And he was at such a young age when he asked for it. I'll tell you, he was wise beyond his years just to ask that question. And God just flooded his life with wisdom. But then he married all these wives, and they were foreign wives, and it's just like that was a no-no. He knew that he wasn't supposed to do it, but he did it anyway. Well, doesn't that sound familiar? Why did he do it? It wasn't so much out of romantic reasons, but a lot of times it was out of political reasons. You marry the wife, or you marry the daughter of a king of a different land, a neighboring land, because now what that represents is that our nations are married. King Nebuchadnezzar, how can you invade us? I am married to your daughter. Don't you value family at all? He's going to have, oh yeah, I better not do that. I don't want to have problems when we have our next family reunion or get together around the table. I don't think my wife is going to be too pleased with me to know that I just have pillaged our daughter's land. And so that's what happens, is that kings would marry foreigners, mainly royalty from other nations, for political reasons, political advantages. So we can keep good relationships. In a sense, we're married. But see, with the case of Solomon and all these other kings and leaders, the problem of that is that they were to remain a pure people of God, meaning that they are to worship the Lord their God. I mean, God gave them the commandments and the statutes and everything that they were to live by, so that they could be holy people and that they could live and prosper in their land, to honor and to glorify God in their lives. And so when Solomon was marrying foreign wives, what happened is that he was also marrying their culture. The culture that believed in other gods. You got Moab, they were worshiping Chemosh. You have the Philistines, they were worshiping Dagon. You had the Canaanites worshiping Baal. And all of these gods were kind of the same thing, just different names and a little bit variations of it. And to me, it's just, these are just idols representing our human sinful lusts and desires. And that's kind of what happens today, is that we take all of what we think, because everybody has their idea of what God should be like, and everybody knows what they want and what they like. And so we just kind of take, what we like, the bits and the pieces, and somehow we put it all into a pot, and then out comes this idol that we've made. There, now that's the true God, because that God represents everything about me, everything the way that I want the world, how I want society and the world to go. Why? Because it benefits me. Life is great. Well, okay, so what's happening here is that as he's marrying these foreign wives, they come with their culture. So he's, in a sense, he's marrying this whole culture. And then that begins to influence his life. And there's compromise. And all of a sudden, when you hear the end of Solomon's life and how he puts all this labor on the people, and I realize he's building a temple, and so, I guess when it comes to anything, we're that's humanity. They're always looking for, where can we find the cheapest labor? And that's what the Pharaoh did to God's people as he enslaved them in Egypt. Oh, this is cheap labor. We can build all these temples and pyramids and stuff. Well, anyway, so that's kind of where it all started. is when Solomon decided to marry these wives and bring in this culture. And the culture kind of already existed because if we look back, Joshua wasn't able to completely rid the people, all these foreigners of the land. King David did a great job, but still, it was always like you can douse a hot fire so much, but there's always a few smoldering coals in there, and it isn't long before they start heating up again. Okay, so what am I getting at here is that then the next king would be Rehoboam. That would be Solomon's son, and he just put even more burdens and taxes and labor on the people, to the point where the northern 10 tribes rebelled, saying, we're not going to have this anymore. We're going to establish our own kingdom. And so there was a leader who became the king of the northern 10 tribes as they succeeded from the south, and his name was Jeroboam. And Jeroboam says that we are totally separating ourselves from the south, and we're going to become our own nation. Matter of fact, I'm going to have a southern border and a northern border, and at both places, I'm going to have a temple to Baal. And so the southern border, the city was Bethel, and the northern city, it was Dan. To say that we are separating ourselves from the southern tribes so much so that we're going to worship a whole different God. We're going to worship this God. And we're even going to set temples at both borders so we don't want anybody crossing these borders. We don't want anybody going back down to Jerusalem to celebrate, for instance, the Passover. Well, we got our God. And so that's why a lot of people will say, well, when we study the kings of Israel and Judah, well, every one of the northern kings was bad. And probably half of the southern kings, maybe over the half of the southern kings were bad. We know Hezekiah and Josiah were wonderful kings. But a lot of people say, well, the reason why when it's written that all the northern kings were bad is because this was all written by a southern writer. And so there's a bias because this rivalry existed. It's just like, well, no. There may have been some bias there, but that's not the reason. The reason being is that they were bad because they worshiped a different God. That's why. They had a whole different set of value system, a whole different set of principles. I mean, they were living very differently than the people of the South. Whoever you worship or whatever you worship, then your values are going to align with whatever you would call as being your God, and I'll put God with a small g. As your God goes, that's how you go. Not just for you, but also your society. And I know that we are living in a day and age where we're all individualists, where there's so much emphasis on self. It's interesting because I watch an NBA basketball game, and now this is a team sport. But the announcer the whole time is saying, well, that player now has got 13 points. This other player over here has now got 7 rebounds. They've taken a team game and they've made it into some kind of an individual spotlight. And I think that's what's happened to society. I mean, God created us to be society. But yet we all see ourselves as individualists. This is what's good for me. I'm making my education work for me. I'm making my money work for me. And all we hear on, with everything, all the emphasis, and you deserve it. You are entitled. So we don't care about our neighbor. We just care about self. And you see, that's what happens. Is that as Christian people, that yes, I agree with Maslow's hierarchy, his pyramid of needs. We all have that. But as a Christian, as we receive the love of God, that we love our neighbor. God helps us to look outside of ourselves. You know that there are people beyond my nose. And that we are a society. And so somebody says, I just mind my own business. I don't need the church to be a Christian. I can be a good person on my own. You can just pray to God saying, I love you, God, and I can do a few good things here and there around the neighborhood. If I see a branch fall down in my neighbor's yard, I can go and take care of it. Or if I see their trash can blowing down the street, I will, go and retrieve it. I don't know, whatever you do. But the thing of it is that if the society around you is immoral, where bad things are happening, you got problems. You may say, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I'm doing what's right, but I'm not stealing anything from my neighbors. I'm not messing around with my neighbor's wife. I'm not lying about my neighbor. I'm not harming my neighbor in any way, physically. But if the neighborhood around you is, you've got problems. It's kind of like the guy on the cruise. He's sitting up in the front of the cruise ship, and he's sitting on his beach chair, and he's just taking in the sun, and he's just having the time of his life. And all of a sudden he's hearing people are there's rumors saying that, there's a hole in the back of the boat. And he's just saying, well, that doesn't concern me because I'm in the front of the boat. The people in the back of the boat, they've got to be concerned, but I'm in the front of the boat. It's not my problem. See, that's what people have got to understand. That what your neighbor does affect you. What you do does affect your neighbor. And see, and that's what's happening. We just don't think of it that way. We always try to think of things in big ways. Well, you know what? If everybody, like I always think of world peace. That's quite a concept, isn't it? Well, world peace, where does it start? It starts with each of us. If we can get along with our neighbors, if we can get along with the people that we work with, if we get along with our family, with the people that that God has called us to be, if we can do that, and if everybody can do that, you know what? Then world peace is going to take care of itself. Okay, so that's, the whole point here of what's going on is that there's so much individualism going on here. Where people are concerned about themselves. They're working the systems to their advantage, even if it puts everybody else out. I mean, they were even paying off judges, and they would, they'd go to their feasts, and they would pay their temple taxes, and they would, make their sacrifices, but it was all just such a ephemeral thing. I mean, it was just so superficial in that as soon as they were done with whatever they were doing, they were going back to just living in their ways. And so that's, the whole thing is that society from the time of Solomon at the end of his reign throughout the kings is that people just, as they got more and more into this worship of the false gods, and following in those ways, that society, as far as the foundations of society, cracks and bigger cracks, and pretty soon it crumbled. First, the northern kingdom of Israel, they were defeated by the Assyrians under their King Sennacherib, and Sennacherib tried to take care of the southern kingdom, but what stopped them? They had a great king, King Hezekiah. God honored King Hezekiah. And that preserved the southern kingdom. But then there was another bad king, Manasseh. But then there was a good king, King Josiah came to reign, and he brought the people back up into a good status where they were worshiping God, following in his ways. It's the glory days. And that's the thing, is that, when you have a real strong leader, and I don't care with what, whether it's in your church, or in government, or in some civic organization, or at work, wherever it is. When you have a good leader, everybody's going to be happy because that leader knows what's right. What's right by the people, what needs to be done. They see the whole picture. They're making sure that you are being taken care of. They're making sure that you understand what your role in this whole organization or company is. They're making sure that you're compensated fairly and maybe even getting a bonus here or there. I mean, everybody's happy. It's just like, oh, we just love having Mr. Schultz or Mrs. Smith being the head of this because, boy, they do a good job. And the last thing you want is to hear that this person has moved away or that they're retiring. It's just like, oh, no. And then when the next person comes in and they don't have this attitude, oh, I'll tell you what, the whole place is like a beehive now. You know, we don't hear about anything. Nothing's being communicated. They don't appreciate my work. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. They don't pay us properly. If anything, our pay has been cut. And then we've learned that a percentage of us now we're being laid off. I'll tell you what, you don't have lots of unhappy campers. What's the difference here? It's leadership. Or this person that comes in is not concerned about those who work for the company. You know, this good leader has been. Wow, you know, we built up this company because of all of your good work. And the next person comes in and thinks, I don't give a rip about any of these people. I think about myself. And guess what? I'm not God-driven. I'm greed-driven. And so I'm selling off the whole company to some organization on the other side of the world. You're all out of a job. Tough luck. You see, but the thing of it is, when it comes to leading people, when you got a strong leader, that leader is going to build the people up. And people are going to be happy. And then when you have a poor leader coming in, well, the people are going to be hurt by that. They are going to be taking steps back. We're going to see the decline of whatever this leader now is leading. And there's always this, oh, do you remember the good old days when we had Mr. Schultz as the head of the company? Oh, we sure wish that we could have him back, or somebody exactly like him. Well, the thing of it is that you got Mr. Schultz. And then when you have a poor leader that comes in after him where you see the decline, everybody's frustrated, well, what's really critical now is that as that person leaves, whether they, that you get another strong leader in there. Because that leader is going to be able to revive things. They're going to get you back to where Mr. Schultz had it. But you know what happens? And see, that's, like when we look at, King Hezekiah, I mean, he's like Mr. Schultz. He gets things up and going again. Then you had one or two bad leaders in there that kind of brought the people down, big decline. Well, but then all of a sudden it's just like, here comes King Josiah and he gets everything going well again. Oh, the good old days have returned. Happy days are here again. We've heard that sung, haven't we? We always are looking for those happy days to be here again. Okay, so what am I getting at here? Is that after Josiah, they had terrible kings. And so they had a king, Jehoahaz, who just was king for a little bit, okay? And we could see that kind of the final knockout punches were going to be coming, because when a leader, a king, sees that they're under a lot of stress from outside nations, it's just like they all kind of know who's king of the hill. When you look at the rise and the fall of empires, and we see it. I mean, you got Israel. They were such a strong nation. Well, we had Egypt, and then you had Israel. And then Assyria, Babylon. And then Persia. Then you have like the Greek and the Egyptian Empire and the Roman Empire. Well, yeah, you studied enough about the rise and the fall of empires over ancient history, I'm sure, as we do now. Everybody knows in this world who's kind of on, who's the king of the hill? Who's in power? And so King Josiah, toward the end of his reign, was really sensing that there's problems on the horizons. There's some empires like Babylonia and Egypt. They are really rising up to power. And these two heavyweights are ready to go at it. And King Josiah knows that King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon wants to nail him. And so what does he do? He tries to ally with the Egyptians, who are the other powerhouse. And their king was the Pharaoh, Necho. And so as Necho is kind of on his way to Carchemish to have this big showdown with Babylonia, Josiah is saying, hey, Pharaoh Necho, hey, look at me. Can we hang out with you? Can we ally with you? And the Pharaoh's kind of saying, no, stay away. This is going to be problems. This is going to be one bloody mess. Just get out of here. Well, he wouldn't, and so Josiah was killed in battle. Okay, so what's happened now is that you got 3 bad kings in a row, and Israel, Judah, they're not able to recover. I mean, it's one thing when you got one bad king, but if you have another good king to help them recover, that's one thing. But when you got 2 bad kings, 3 bad kings, pretty soon you just go down. Okay, so what happens? You got King Jehoiakim, he's the king. And so Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians, are able to defeat the Pharaoh, Necho, the Egyptians, so they are the powerhouse. And so the first hit was against King Jehoiakim. And then the second one was against King Jehoiachin. And then the third king was King Zedekiah. These were the last of the 3 kings. And so it was the 1, 2, 3, the 1-2 punch, and then the third one. But every time that there was one of these punches, the Babylonians took more of God's people from the land into the exile. And so it was the Babylonians who were able to destroy Jerusalem and the temple and deport the people to Babylon, where they were in exile then for 70 years. The only people that remained in the land were just some of the people who were there to keep raising the crops and making sure that things were happening in that land. But that's the downfall of Israel. And so the whole key for us is always to worship the Lord our God above all things.
You have been watching To Know Christ with Reverend Jeff Pedersen, pastor of the Lutheran Church of Peace in Platteville, Wisconsin. Thank you for watching, and tune in again next week for To Know Christ.